Alright, we'll call to order the regular meeting of the City Council of the City of Sioux Harbor, October 10th, 2022. Roll call, please.
Woodruff.
Here.
Washer.
Here.
Redwall.
Here.
Passy.
Here.
Erickson.
Here.
Redden.
Here. Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any additions or changes to the agenda?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to request the addition of consent agenda item number 13, approving the application of Christina Schroeder for license to conduct massage therapy at 620 First Avenue. Also, the addition of consent agenda item number 14, authorizing the acting mayor and city clerk to execute and deliver a grant agreement with MnDOT for airport improvement excluding land acquisition for the AWAS relocation project. Also, I'd like to add under communications, item number 2, an email from Kitty Mayo, Lake County Press, regarding upcoming candidate forum. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right, next, I'm looking for a motion for approval of the agenda.
A motion to approve the agenda with the amendments.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next, I have a motion adjourning the regular meeting and calling to order a public hearing for the purpose of considering the ordering of an improvement of the following: 4th Avenue from 3rd Street to 6th Street, 5th Avenue from 5th Street to 6th Street, 6th Avenue from 4th Street to 7th Street, and 5th Street from 4th Avenue to 7th Avenue. Two Harbors, Minnesota, pursuant to Minnesota Statute 429.011 to 429.111. The area proposed to be assessed for all or a portion of the improvement is bounded by 7th Avenue, 7th Street, 3rd Avenue, and 3rd Street.
I'll make the motion to adjourn our meeting and carry on with the public hearing.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. We've adjourned our regular meeting, and we're now in the special public hearing. First up, I have an appearance from Joe Ryan, Bolton Mink.
I'm going to move the podium so that I can
Sure.
see the audience as well as the council, and so I can get my computer, just so I can work the slides. Okay. Look at that. All right. Everyone can hear me okay? All right, so let me start the screen share.
Not in the meeting, it looks like.
Oh, did I leave the meeting somehow?
It's a different meeting now.
Oh, you know what, that's right. Give me a second. I've got to connect to the council. While we're waiting, so this is the public hearing for the street project. I do have copies of the presentation there on the table. So if anybody needs one, I got about 50 of them there, so should have plenty for everybody. It's taking a while to load for some reason. If anyone needs a copy of the presentation, I can hand those out while we're waiting.
Oh, you don't want it?
No, I don't need it.
Sure.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Guess I'll lose my thought. Tough night. Hopefully that's the worst thing that happens. All right.
Don't see it in there.
Yeah, and I'm still connected to Wi-Fi. I'm trying to bring up the regular council meeting notice, so I can get the Zoom link. I mean, I can share, everyone in here will be able to see, but I want to make sure that we can get the presentation out to the, anyone that's connected remotely. Making progress.
The public can't get in on that Zoom and watch it, can they?
There we go.
They can?
Okay. All right, I'm joining the meeting. No video, we don't need that. Okay, now am I there, Jose?
I see you, yeah.
Okay, so now I should be able to share my screen with the presentation and launch the show. There we go. Now I think we're set. Good?
Yep.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for your patience. So this is the public hearing for the proposed project that the city would undertake to rebuild about 10 blocks of road in the years 2023 and 2024. So my name is Joe Ryan. I'm from the firm of Bolton and Menk, and we serve as the city engineers for the city of Two Harbors, and we've been in that role for about the past 5 or 6 years. So I've been here before for some presentations that some of you might have seen me in council meetings from time to time. So I'm here tonight to present the information to you. Adam Nix from our design team is also with me here. He's been around the city for a while as well, lives right up by the airport. So this project is a required step in this project. So we're following Minnesota State Statute Chapter 429. And that process allows the city council undertaking public improvements to follow this process, and then thereby we can utilize special assessments to finance a portion of the project. So we've got to follow this checklist in order to be able to utilize special assessments. And this is one of the requirements of the checklist, is that we present the information to the affected residents once the information is ready. So it's really kind of a three-step process. There's the initial preliminary development phase, which is what we've gone through up to this point. And that's where we prepare a document called the feasibility report. And the feasibility report is our initial look at the project, and the three main questions it's supposed to answer is, what do we want to do, how much is it going to cost, and how will we pay for it? Once we have that information pulled together, we present the report to the council, then they call this public hearing, and then we share that information with the public. And after that, you have the chance to provide feedback, and then the council makes a discrete decision of, do we want to proceed in the next step, or do we want to stop the project? If they want to proceed, the next step is final design. So we put together all the detailed plans for the project, and then we bring that back to the council again for approval. And if they're satisfied with that, they would then approve it, and then we go into the construction phase. So we go out and put it on the market for bids from contractors. If we get good bids and the council wants to award that contract, then we'd award a contract and be under construction. So kind of the three phases: preliminary design, final design, and then bidding and construction. So right now we've completed phase one, the preliminary design, and that's the information we're presenting to you tonight. So we've got a presentation here. I've already spoken for a few minutes. I'll warn you up front, this presentation is probably about 45 minutes long. Council's been through this presentation with you before on other projects. And I know it's a lot of information, but there is a lot of information on this project. And it's a big project to the city, big project obviously to property owners that are affected by it. So I think you deserve the level of attention that we want to put into this presentation so that you understand as well as possible what the city is proposing to do, so that you have information and you can ask any questions that you may have on your mind. So, unless there's any questions right away, I'll go ahead and get started with the presentation. And usually then how this works is I'll give the presentation, council has the first shot then to ask questions of me, and I'll answer their questions, and once they're done with their questions, they'll open it up to the audience, and you can come up one by one to the microphone, and you can ask questions of the council, ask questions of me, and we'll stay here as long as we need to until everyone gets a chance to ask the questions that are on their mind and for us to try and answer them as best we can. So, here's the agenda we're going to cover in the presentation. Some background information, what we're proposing to do for improvements, what that's going to cost, estimated. Reviewing the assessments, so the part of the cost that would be assessed against the benefited properties. What the rights are of the property owners, because you do have rights under the state statute, that's why we have to follow that statute. And then schedule if the project continues to move forward. So a little bit of background. The city does have a capital improvement plan that looks out over the next 5 years, and they update that, they try to update that every year. So the previous version that covered the years 2021 through 2025, the county knew, or the county was projecting they were going to rebuild 5th Street from Highway 61, 7th Avenue down to 4th Avenue in the year 2023. So we knew that about their plan. The city's project at that time, the CIP did not propose adding any other blocks onto it yet. But we were under a joint project with the county that we just wrapped up here for years 2021 and 2022. And that project went very well. I think both the city and the county saw that joint project as a success, and as important as anything else, both saw substantial cost savings over what they had estimated the projects to cost if they had done them individually. So once the city had information, and we knew this county was looking at reconstructing 5th Street, the previous project they had done was 8th Street over by Minnehaha School. And we added in some city avenues that made it more of a neighborhood project. So given the success of that, the city council approached the county and said, would you be willing to consider doing another joint project again in the neighborhood around 5th Street? And they were open to that idea, so both of us started putting together information that it would take to do that. So when the city council updated its capital improvement plan for the 5-year period of 2022 to 2026, we did add in the blocks of 6th Avenue and 5th Avenue to make it more of a neighborhood project rather than just a county doing 5th Street all by itself. So that was adopted by the city council last December, and then that's what kind of got this ball rolling for this project that we're developing. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is the special assessment policy. So if we're going to assess properties for a portion of the cost, we've got to have a policy to do that by. And the city does have one. It was first adopted in 2017. After some lessons learned, it was amended in 2018. And then it was amended again in 2020, specifically with regards to how the city assesses for sidewalks. So that's some of the background of the capital improvement plan and the special assessment policy. A little more background, as I mentioned, Lake County has a 5-year plan that kind of mirrors the city's 5-year plan. They're showing 5th Street from 4th Avenue to 7th Avenue for 2023. In those initial discussions with the city, once we decided to try and develop another joint project, they undertook consideration of adding 4th Avenue, so the east-west 4th Avenue, from 6th Street over to 3rd Street. So far, 5th to 6th is in the project. The board meets tomorrow to officially decide if they want to add the blocks from 5th Street to 3rd Street to the project. And so far, the indication is it seems likely they will, but we won't know officially until after the board meeting tomorrow. But we've prepared our information assuming that that work is going to be done so that we've got the most complete report for our project as we can. So, as I mentioned, it turns it into more from a single road project, 5th Street itself, into more of a neighborhood project. We get an economy of scale, and based on our experience from the previous project, both the county and the city save monies. And those of you that are interested, we're going to be having the final assessment hearing on the previous project coming up here in November, and you're welcome to come back to that. But right now, the initial calculations look like the assessments are going to come in substantially under what we had estimated at the start of that project. So, kind of a little bit sneak preview of if this project develops again and goes similar to the way the last project did, hopefully those assessments at the end of the project will come in under the numbers we're going to show you here tonight. So, the map on the screen shows the project area. The streets colored in blue are under the county's jurisdiction. So you've got 5th Street from 7th Avenue down to 4th Avenue, and then 4th Avenue from 6th Street over to 3rd Street. So 6 blocks of county roads. And then the city is adding 4 blocks of city avenues. 5th Avenue from 5th Street over to 6th Street. And then 6th Avenue from 4th Street over to 7th Street. And those of you that are familiar with the project we did last year, we rebuilt 6th Avenue from 7th Street to its west end. So if this project proceeds and we rebuild these 3 blocks, all of 6th Avenue will be done from its west end all the way over to 4th Street. It'll be all brand new. Which, given the presentation that MnDOT just gave at the 5 o'clock meeting, they're looking at rebuilding Highway 61 starting in the year 2025. So if we can get 6th Avenue built by the end of 2024, that gives us a brand new local street to utilize while MnDOT's got, Highway 61 torn up. So it'll be better for the residents in the area south of 61 to be able to maneuver with a newer street there on 6th Avenue. You'll also see one little red dot on the very east end of 5th Avenue. We're not rebuilding the street over there, but what we've got is a unique situation where we've got a dead-end water main that does not connect to any other water main and does not have a hydrant. So there's no way really right now for the city to be able to flush and adequately maintain that water main. So if we do the project for these other blocks, we would sneak over there and we would add a hydrant at the end of the east end of 5th Avenue, so just to increase the operation and maintenance ability of the city for the water system at that location. So that's that little red dot you see off to the right-hand side of the map. So, as I mentioned, we've done a preliminary investigation so far. So we've identified the proposed work, and we've worked out how we're going to approach it. We haven't dotted every I and crossed every T yet. There's still a lot of work to be done in final design. But if the project proceeds, final design will be done this fall, and construction would be targeted to begin roughly late May or early June of next year. Before we get to that point, we would have additional public meetings. Tonight is to talk about what we're going to do, what it's going to cost, and the assessments, the estimated assessments. Before construction starts, we'd have a more dedicated meeting to what are you going to see for construction, like how is your mail going to be handled, and how can you access the streets, and will your water be shut off, and will your sewer be interrupted. So those are the kind of things we'd invite you back in again in the spring before work starts to go over all of those types of information. One other thing important to note right now, the city of Two Harbors is not committed to this project at this point. All they've committed to is the preliminary design and the feasibility report that's been prepared. So if they feel it's not financially feasible or not feasible for any other reason, or they don't want to do it, they can pull the plug after tonight's public hearing and the project goes on. Okay, so the feasibility report. As I mentioned, we have a report. So it looks like this is a copy of last year's report, and I don't have the new ones bound yet, so I'm just using this one as an example. But the new one is very similar to this one, about 120 pages long, and about half of that is figures and costs and tables and all that kind of stuff. But what it defines is the existing conditions that are out there now, the proposed improvements we want to do, what it's going to cost, and how we're going to finance those costs. The City Council officially ordered the report, which is required by the state law, on April 25th, and they officially accepted the report on September 12th. And when they accepted the report, that's when they told the city clerk to schedule the public hearing and to place the advertisement in the newspaper and to make the mailing to the project area. So copies of this report will be available on the city's website, along with the presentation from tonight's meeting once we get done with the meeting, and we can get it posted probably within the next week or so. Things will be available on the city's website. They'll also be available here in hard copy at City Hall if anybody wants to come in and look at the information. So proposed improvements, we won't spend a lot of time on this, but this just shows what's under a typical city street. You usually have sanitary sewer, which takes the wastewater from things like your sinks and your toilets and your laundry tubs, those types of things, collects that and routes it to the sanitary sewer treatment facility before it gets treated and then discharged to Lake Superior. You usually also have a storm sewer, which is a separate sewer that handles the surface water. So from rain or from water that's running down the street, goes into the catch basins that are located usually on the edges of the street, collects that water, routes it through a separate sewer, and usually then that gets routed to the lake as well. So you've got two different sewers, sanitary sewer and storm sewer. And then you have water main. So we have water main on all 10 blocks of this project, so water main's running under all the streets. And then from the water main, you have individual service lines that extend from the main out to each one of the houses, or each one of the properties. And there's a shut-off on that individual service line from the main out to the house. And the city owns the main, and they also own the service line up to and including that shut-off. Because if the city ever has to shut off the service to a house, and say a house sells and the new people aren't moved in yet, it's going to be vacant for a couple months, the city needs to shut that water off. The city has to have the ability to go and own and operate that shut-off. There's also individual service lines that run from the sanitary sewer up to the houses as well. For those, the city owns the main line, the property owner owns the line coming from their house up to that main line. So that's a general overview of what's underneath the street. So you look at the street, you just see the surface and you maybe see a sidewalk, but there's usually at least 2 or maybe 3 pipe networks underneath that street as well. So this project would propose to replace all of that. In the infrastructure, the utility superintendent just sent me a picture a couple weeks ago. They had a water main break here in town, and he dug up the water main break, and there was the old water main pipe stamped 1889 from when it was, so, and that wasn't the part that was leaking though. I mean, that part was still working okay, it was, 10 feet away that was leaking. But he took a picture of this and he sent it to me, he goes, here, take a look at this, put it in your scrapbook. Because when they buried it again, that 1889 pipe is still in the ground. But it just goes to show you that the area that we're talking about for the project was platted in the 1870s. So most of the sewer and water out there is decades old, in some cases more than 100 years old. So it's due for replacement with new materials. So we'll just run through this quickly of what we're planning to do, just kind of step by step. So for the water system, we would propose to completely replace all of the water lines that are under the streets now. We also would replace all of the individual service lines from the main out to and including the shutoffs. So you'd get new mains, new individual little service lines out to the shutoffs, and you get a new shutoff. And then on the back side of the shutoff, we reconnect it to the service line that extends up into the house. In order to do that, we'd have to set up a temporary water system because it's going to take us probably a month for each block to remove the old water main, get the new water main in, make sure it's pressure tested and all of that. So in the meantime, we'd have to set up a temporary water system to make sure that everyone is still in water service while we're building a new system. So it's kind of a 2-step process. Set the temporary system up so we can take the old one out of service, build the new system, get it tested, and then switch over so that you're in service on the new system. Sanitary sewer, we would propose to completely replace all of the mains and manholes on the sanitary sewer as well. We'd also replace the individual service lines that run from the main up to the houses. We wouldn't go all the way to the house, we would only go about as far as the water services. Because a lot of times they're side by side, serving the house, the water service and the sewer service. So if we go with the water service, usually out by where the property line is, so it's about 30 or 35 feet, go out and replace that water line and water service, we'll replace the sewer service out to that same location. Storm sewer, there's not that much in this neighborhood, but what is there will need to be replaced so it fits the new street. If we're adjusting the street width a little bit or adjusting the elevations, got to make sure the new storm sewer can fit that. We also, in order to protect the investment we're making in the streets, will install drain tiles, so subsurface drain lines that will collect any groundwater and make sure we get it drained away from our streets, because water is one of the natural enemies of streets and it will destroy a street if you let it undermine your street over time. So we'll set up drain tiles wherever we can physically make them work with the grades, and we would install that as part of the project. Sidewalk, we would completely replace all the sidewalks that are out there now. So you'd get brand new sidewalks running parallel to all the avenues. Those would all be upgraded to comply with requirements of the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, including the ramps at the intersections where you're crossing the curb lines onto and off of the streets. When we redo the sidewalks, typically, grades are changing a little bit or things are changing a little bit, so we'll have to assert the individual service walks that go up towards the houses. We usually have to replace those for a short amount of distance. How far depends on the slopes. Sometimes there's some steps too that we may have to replace steps, but all of that would be worked into the final design, and all that's estimated right now and projected in our feasibility report. And then the street itself, We would completely reconstruct the street. Obviously, those sewers and waters are usually about 8 to 10 feet deep, so we're gonna have the whole street dug up to a depth of about 8 or 10 feet. So when we build that back up, once we get the utilities done, we'll rebuild the whole structural section of the street. I mean, the street has strength to it, it has structure. Usually has a pavement on top, it has a gravel layer in the middle, it has a sand layer down below. And then below that sand layer, you have a fabric to keep the soils down below separated from your engineered materials for the street. So we would completely rebuild that whole structural section to make sure the streets have brand new 100% strength when we're done. As far as some of the information, the particulars on the streets, Fifth Avenue exists right now at 32 feet wide from curb to curb, and we would propose to rebuild it at that same width. That will match the blocks of Fifth Avenue that we did in last year's project, so we'll be consistent with the width of Fifth Avenue that we would do in this project. And this is just an engineer, we call it a cross-section. It's if we took a knife and sliced through the street so you can see it from the end. You can't read this here, I'm sure, it's far too small, it's small on my screen. But it typically shows that we're building the street 16 feet out from center line each way, so 32 feet total. We'd have sidewalks on each side. Typical sidewalk width along City Avenue is 5 feet wide. So, and there'd be a grass boulevard of about 5 feet in between the curb and the sidewalk for this block of Fifth Avenue. This is a figure just showing that one little red dot I mentioned at the very east end of Fifth Avenue where we want to replace that hydrant, or add a hydrant that doesn't exist currently. This just shows kind of the limits of the work we do there. And 6th Avenue, a little bit of information on that. The existing 6th Avenue, because we've got these 3 blocks, the 400 block, the 500 block, 600 block. And each one's a little bit different width right now. So 600 block has curbs, then you get in the 500 block, 400 blocks, they don't have curbs, and so the edges and the width varies a little bit. So we would propose that all of those blocks be standardized and built at 28 feet from curb to curb. So we put curb on both sides, 28 feet wide. That'll match the 2 blocks that we just did in last year's project. So when we get done, from 4th Street all the way to the west end would be consistent with 6th Avenue all the way down. For the 400 and 500 blocks, you know that's where the creek, it runs under the tunnel over the west side of town, down the alley. And then it shifts, and when you get to the segment from 6th Street down to 4th Street, it runs right along the south side of the road. Because of that, we would shift those 2 blocks of 6th Avenue north 5 feet to give a little more buffer space next to the creek. But if you go out there and look at it now, the existing roads already shift. When you come from west to east and you cross 6th Street, 6th Avenue does shift a little bit north. So we're essentially maintaining that shift that's there now, but we kind of formalize it with our design. And that's primarily, again, due to Skunk Creek. So, typical cross-section of 6th Avenue on the 600 block, 28 feet face-to-face, sidewalks on both sides. Here, because of the slopes, we would pull the sidewalks in, they'd be right immediately behind the curbs, which if you go out there now, that's where they are now. There's a lot of grade coming from north to south as you come through those lots, and if we try to create a grass boulevard and push those sidewalks out, it creates a lot of havoc with trying to get slopes to match back in. So for that block, we would keep the sidewalks right behind the Then we get to the 400 and 500 blocks. Here we're showing the road shifting 5 feet north to give more clearance to Skunk Creek. And we're only showing sidewalk on the north side. So the side that has the homes, that's where the majority of walkers are going to be. So there would not be a sidewalk on the Skunk Creek side, the south side of 6th Avenue for those 2 blocks. We would simply have the road, we'd put a curb in there, and that would be it. Then we'd slope down into the creek. But there would be a sidewalk on the north side. Here we would be able to have a grass boulevard between the curb and the sidewalk. We did look at, so that covers the basic improvements we want to do for 5th Avenue, 6th Avenue. We did look at a couple of options that we identified during the course of our preliminary layouts. One is, there is currently no water main on 4th Street. So the water main that comes on 6th Avenue just dead ends, there's a hydrant. The water main that comes on 5th Avenue dead ends with no hydrant. So we talked about, well, we could put a water main in north-south on 4th Street and tie 5th Avenue into 6th Avenue, and then the alley that comes down behind the credit union there is a water main down that alley, so we can connect into that water main and make it all looped. Which is fine, we can physically do it. It's not the cheapest improvement to do. And in talking with the county's looking at maybe rebuilding 4th Street at some point in the future, maybe out in 5 to 10 years. So what we concluded is it makes more sense that we would do that water main if and when the county rebuilds 4th Street. And we can do it as part of a larger, overall project rather than just trying to come in and fix this one issue now. So it'll be a lot more cost effective and a lot more coordinated if we do it in the future. So that is in the report because we identified it, so we wrote it up, but we're recommending to the council that we do not add that to the project because it makes more sense to do it at a later time. So this is just a figure that shows how we would have done it if we kept it in the project. Okay, one other option at the same location, 4th Street, for those who are familiar with it, there's the signal up at Highway 61, and then there's the credit union on the west side, and there's a nice sidewalk that comes down that west boulevard. It crosses the alley and to the driveway where their parking lot is, and then it just stops. And you got about 100 feet down to 6th Avenue with no sidewalk. Well, when we're rebuilding 6th Avenue, we're going to bring sidewalk all the way down to 4th Street. So now that gap of 100 feet really sticks out of why doesn't it have sidewalk? So we looked at that, and that would be pretty easy to do because it's a surface improvement. We don't have to dig up a lot of stuff to do a sidewalk. So that can be done pretty cost effectively. And what's even better for the city's perspective is because 4th Street is a county road, the county says that they would probably be able to pay for the installation of that sidewalk. So we can identify it, have it done in the project, and actually the county would wind up funding that segment of sidewalk if they're agreeable to that, which so far they've indicated they would be. So this is the picture, kind of the side-by-side. You can see on the left picture, it shows the aerial view where you can see the credit union there, you can see the sidewalk coming down and it stops at their driveway. And then you've got that gap where there is no sidewalk down to 6th Avenue. So on the right-hand picture, you can see what's kind of colored in that maroon color. That's the new sidewalk we would add in. So we bring that sidewalk down to 6th Avenue, and then we bring the sidewalk on 6th Avenue all the way over, so it's a nice continuous route. So you can walk down 6th Avenue, turn, go up 4th Street, and get to the signal at the highway. Okay, so that's kind of an overview of everything the city's looked at on their blocks, the 4 blocks that are in the city's portion of the project. There's also 6 blocks in the county's portion, right? The 3 blocks on 5th Street and the 3 blocks on 4th Avenue. So here's an overview of what the county's going to do, and we have this documented in our report too because we want to look at the whole project as an integrated whole. So a couple of the highlights, that there's a big box culvert that you might know about on 6th Avenue that crosses under 5th Street. Skunk Creek, it's an open channel coming down the south side of 6th Avenue, and then it goes through essentially a tunnel, right, a box culvert. That's what it's called, a box culvert. So the county would replace their box culvert that exists under 5th Street, and they would pay for that 100%. 5th Street is their roadway. They'd also replace the storm sewer that goes from that big box culvert up to Highway 61. And then they would also extend new storm sewer from that box culvert all the way down to 4th Avenue, and they would put in new collection points at each of the intersections to help the water drain better. They also would drain tile their roadways too, to be consistent with the way we're drain tiling our roadways. Then as far as sidewalks on the county segments, right now, sidewalk exists on both sides of 5th Street and both sides of 4th Avenue. And they would continue to have that in the proposed improvements. 5th Street would be a 6-foot sidewalk running north-south on both sides. It would be immediately behind the back of curb. On 4th Avenue, they would have it on both sides, and it would be a 5-foot wide sidewalk, and there'd be a grass boulevard between the sidewalk and the curb. I know this is a lot of information we're throwing at you, but I want to make sure again that you have as much information as possible. And it is all in the slides, so you can refer to those later at your leisure. As far as the width of the streets themselves for the county, 5th Street would be designated to be 32 feet wide from curb to curb, and it would have parking allowed on one side, which would be the west side for southbound traffic. 4th Avenue would be 32 feet wide again, and they would have one parking lane again on this time on the south side, so for the eastbound traffic. That's the side, the library, it's on the corner of 4th Avenue and 6th Street, so the parking would be on the library side, south side of 4th Avenue. So here's a couple of representations of how it would look. Fifth Street, you can see that car over on the far left, that's the parking lane, which would be coming southbound. And then there'd be one lane of traffic for each direction of traffic, and there'd be a sidewalk on both sides right behind the curbs. 4th Avenue, this is also County Road. You can see the picture there on the bottom. We're looking east in the picture, so the car on the right-hand side is parked against the curb, so the parking is on the south side of the road. Then there'd be one lane of traffic for travel in each direction. Sidewalks on both sides with a boulevard between the curb and the sidewalk. Driveways, so obviously there's a number of driveways that would intersect our project between the 10 blocks that we're doing. Any driveways that are there would be repaired. The material, we'd match what's there now. So if you have a concrete driveway, we put back concrete. If you have a blacktop driveway, we put back blacktop. If you have gravel, we put back gravel. The width would match what's there now. And as far as how far back we go in your driveway, it would depend on how far we need to go to make sure we've got a good, nice, smooth transitional slope. You know, if we lower the road 6 inches or 12 inches, we want to make sure that we feather that back far enough in the driveway so that, you know, it's not an abrupt change for you pulling in and out of your driveway. We want to make sure that we have a good, nice slope. Trees is another issue that we document and that we get a lot of questions on. So the approach is try to preserve the trees as much as possible, but the honest truth is they will be impacted by the project and a majority of them will need to be removed. There's a lot of factors that go into this, especially when we're doing the underground utilities, because those underground utilities being so deep, in order to have safe trenches for the worker, those trenches have to be so wide, and especially those little individual service lines going up to the houses. Usually there's trees planted near where those services are coming in, and they just won't physically survive the trenches that we have to dig to do the utility installations. So we have to consider the long-term health of the tree. Will it even survive the impact that it's going under? Have to make sure that it's going to be safe afterwards. We don't want to damage a tree and then leave it in place and have it potentially blow down in a windstorm and cause property damage or injure somebody that might be walking by. We have to consider where our utilities are located. So all of that gets rolled together. We do put out specific individual figures that show all of the trees and mark which ones we're projecting that we'll have to remove. And we do review that with Trees and Trails Committee. We're on the agenda for a week from Thursday to review that with them, and then we'll go out in the field and we'll actually walk it. The chair of Trees and Trails along with the forester, and we'll review those tree removals and answer any questions and get input from them as necessary. So that's an overview of kind of all of the improvements that would be made. Now transitioning into phasing of how the work would be done. Given the size of the project and the length of the construction season we have up here in Two Harbors, and just knowing the pace at which the contractors can work when they have to do work within an existing residential neighborhood, we don't anticipate we can get all this work done in 1 year. It'll take 2 construction seasons is what we're planning on. Last year we did the same thing. We planned a 2-year project for the years 21 and 22. That one, because of the school, we had a definite, you have to get the stuff around the school done by the time school opens. Well, we don't have anything like the school in this year's project. It's, there's no unique properties like that. So we really don't have any definitive phasing for the project identified right now because we don't have a need for that. We'll probably put some milestones in the contract that the contractor will have to meet. But we'll be looking for their input and guidance as to how they want to best build the project. How can they most effectively do it? And some of it might depend on when they can get the materials, especially with that big box culvert. If they need more lead time to get the materials for that box culvert, maybe they do that part of 5th Street and 6th Avenue last and they work other areas. So I don't have a question. If you ask me right now, when is my street going to get done? The best I can do is say, either 2023 or 2024. I can't give you a definite time frame because we won't know yet until we get the final plans done and then we get bids from the contractors and get their input on how they want to build the project. And letting them help set that schedule of how they build it also allows us to get better prices. So it's in our interest to make sure that we're flexible with how they want to build it so that we can get the best prices and keep our costs down. We covered most of this already. All right, so now we'll get into the numbers. So estimated costs. So we have an appendix in the report, Appendix B. Appendix A is all the maps. Appendix B is all the costs. So we have cost estimates broken down street by street, and for each street, we have, like 40 or 50 line items that we break it down. We try and estimate, how much gravel we're gonna need, how much blacktop we're gonna need, how much concrete, and then, how much is that gonna cost per foot, and build as accurate a cost estimates as we can right now. So they are broken down in the appendix by each block, and then by the type, so water main, sewer, street, sidewalk. So for here, you can review all the information in detail if you want, but here I'm just going to show summary totals for the project. So here we've got a table. This is on slide 31, if you want to look on your slides. 5th Street, the county is handling the street and the sidewalk because that's their roadway, but the city is responsible for the sewer and water that's underneath the roadway. So we've got an estimated cost there of about $415,000 for 5th Street, and that would just be utilities. 4th Avenue, that's also a county road, so the county handles the road and the sidewalk. We have to handle the sewer and the water, and that's 3 blocks long. We've got an estimate of about $1,320,000 for those utilities. And then we get into the 4 blocks of the city street. So 5th Avenue from 6th Street, Waterfront Drive, to 5th Street, that 1 block would be about $1,150,000, and that would be for utilities, streets, sidewalks. The 3 blocks of 6th Avenue all range from about $1 million to $1.3 million. So the total of all the work the city would do, so everything the city's responsible for, totals up to about $6,587,000. We did look at those options like we mentioned. Widening out 6th Avenue to get it consistently to 28 feet, that would add about $62,000 to the project. We are recommending that that be in the project if the council wants to move forward. 4th Street water main looping, that little piece of water main we showed going from 6th Avenue to loop the water main, $197,000. That we don't feel is justified for that cost. Again, we feel we can do it more cost effectively when the county reconstructs 4th Street at some point in the future. So that option we are recommending the council not include if they choose to move forward. And then finally, 4th Street, that 100 feet of sidewalk that we identified, estimate the cost at less than $10,000, so that seems like a pretty cost-effective solution. So we would recommend that get included in the project if the council wants to move forward. And again, we expect that sidewalk will be funded by Lake County. Excuse me just a second. I'm a long-winded engineer. Okay. So, cost for the county. So the county is doing essentially 6 blocks. So 3 of the blocks are on 5th Street, from 4th Avenue to 6th to 7th Avenue. And that's got a total cost of $2,628,000 estimated right now. 4th Avenue, there's 3 blocks, but we split it into 2 parts because of the designations. So counties, they function a little different than the city does. The county gets some money from MnDOT called state aid money. So they're able to designate some of their roads as state aid roads. County State Aid Highway, CSAH. So you'll see that acronym, CSAH, in the presentation. And that means it's a road that the county has designated as eligible to get money from the state for construction and maintenance and all that kind of stuff. So 4th Avenue from 6th Street over to 4th Street is a CSAH, a County State Aid Highway. From 4th Street to 3rd Street, it's not. It's just a regular county road. So that means it's funded locally by the county through its local option sales tax or its property levies and those types of things. So that's why we have to separate that block out, because it's a different funding source for the county than the CSAH, the County State Aid Highways. So that's why it's got its own estimate. So long story short, the 6 blocks that the county has, estimated total cost is about $4.5 million. So when you put that together, you've got the city's part at about $6,587,000. Those optional improvements we looked at, and then the county's part of the project, we come up with a grand total of the overall project of about $11.4 million, which is a very large project for 2 harbors. which is why we're taking the time to go over it in as much detail as we are tonight, because it's an important project for both the city and the county. So you can see that the city, even though the county has 6 blocks, the city only has 4 blocks, the city's actually got the larger cost share because we've got all the underground utilities. All the water main is owned by the city, all the sanitary sewer is owned by the city. And so that's where the cost difference is. That's why when you look at it, the city's cost is actually higher than the county's. It's because of all those underground utilities. So, we've gone through what we propose to do, we've gone through what we estimate currently that we think it's going to cost. Now we're into the financing. So the county, for their portion of the project, is going to use a combination of funds. So they've got eligibility for state aid money. They may or may not use it. They've got other reserves built up that they may utilize. And they also want to use some of the sales tax money that they've got. So everything will be designed to the standards we need for the state aid money. But the county is going to use a combination of sources to fund their part. Now the city, unfortunately, we don't have state aid money. We've got less options for our financing. So we've got fund reserves that build up. Everybody pays their sewer and water bills, and there's usually a little bit of that that's built in for future upkeep and maintenance to the systems. So we've got some reserves for the sewer and water funds that we can use. The city will likely sell a bond, so they'll put this out on the market and say, we're going to do a $6 million project, and what banks want to buy this, loan us that money, and we'll pay an interest back. You're essentially taking on a loan. It sells a bond, but it's essentially like a loan that the city takes out to build the project. So we'll have the bond, we'll have some fund reserves, and then a portion will be assessments. The assessments, though, the city's got to have the money up front to do it. So the city will have to sell the bond for the whole cost, and then essentially pay itself back with its reserves and with the assessments it collects from the properties. So, as I mentioned, in order to utilize assessments, we've got to follow the state chapter 429, and we've got to follow the city's adopted policy. So let's talk about assessments. That's for the property owners that abut these improvements. This is real dollars that is going to affect you. So we want to make sure that we go through this so that you understand what kind of costs we're talking about here and what the process is and what your rights are. So let's start by saying what's not going to be assessed. I mean, you see an $11 million project and you about to have a heart attack. I know the council the first time I reviewed the numbers with them, but a lot of that is not accessible, right? So right away, the sanitary sewer mains and the water mains that the city owns, they do not assess for that. We also do not assess for the storm sewer or the drain tile. And the other big piece is the county pays their own way, so we don't assess for any county costs. All we're looking at is city costs. So really all we assess for is we assess for a portion of the street cost on the city's avenues. We assess for a portion of the sidewalks on the city's avenues. We assess for the individual service lines from the sewer that runs from the main out to your houses, because each house is the only one that's using that service line. So each house pays for its own service line. And on the water main, I mentioned before, the city owns out to and including the shutoff. So that the city pays for. But if we have to do any work on the back side of the shutoff, between the shutoff and the house, that would only be benefiting that house, and we would assess for that. But in the last 5 projects we've done in the city, I can count on one hand the number of services where we had to do work beyond the shutoff. So we essentially never, or very rarely, assess anything for the water services. So a good chunk of the project don't go into the assessment pot. So I mean, it's a large project, but a lot of it gets taken right off the top by other funding sources. As far as what we do assess, the city's policy for streets is the city pays half and the properties pay half. So we split that cost 50-50. Sidewalks, the city's existing policy for assessments is for each square of sidewalk that gets installed, it's $50 gets assessed to the properties. Sanitary sewer services and water services, as I mentioned, those are only serving one individual house. So that house pays directly for the cost of that service line. But again, for the water service, it's only if it goes past the shutoff. There's no cost to the property owner from the main out to the shutoff. So this looks at the total project costs. Again, as we mentioned, about $11.4 million. But all the stuff that's being paid out of other sources is $8.1 million. So the part of the project that's left to be even considered for assessments is about 3.3 million. Still a very sizable amount, but it's only, whoops, right there at the top of the slide, it's only 29% of the total project cost. That even gets considered for assessment. And then most of that gets broken down by the formulas, the 50-50 cost share. So the actual total assessments we do is only a fraction of that. So we start to talk about the assessments, the parcels that we would propose to include, or that would be eligible to be included for the assessments, are those that are immediately adjacent to the project segments. And the key for assessments, the state's law requires that we have to provide benefit to the properties. So whatever your property benefits in the increase, or the dollar value of benefit you get, that's the limit as to what the city can assess you for the work. So, if we put if you've got an old busted up street in front of your house and we come in and put a brand new street, and that increases your value by, $20,000, the city could assess up to that amount because in the state's eyes, you've received that benefit, so the city is allowed to charge you up to that maximum benefit. That's not necessarily what we charge though, but we just need to make sure we stay below that amount, because otherwise you can legally challenge us. So, again, the properties we would propose for including in the assessment roll are all those that are immediately adjacent to the improvements. As far as the method for assessments, we propose to use the area method. So we'll take the costs and divide it by the overall area of the project and get a cost per square foot. And then we'll look at the sizes of the parcels and assign those costs based on the square footage. And this, we categorize residential properties, which I'm going to get into next. The standard when the plats were originally done in the city back in the 1870s or 1880s, this standard lot was 50 feet wide by 140 feet long, 7,000 square feet. Now, there's been a lot of changes over the years. There's lots that have been split. You'll see lots that are only 25 feet wide. You'll see lots that have been combined. We've got 100 feet wide. You see them in different configurations. But in general, that spirit is, a single family lot was 7,000 square feet. So we look at that and we assign that a value of 1. Right? So if you've got a 7,000 square foot, we're saying you've got a value of 1 unit. And we know that, if it's a little bit smaller, a little bit bigger, that's still considered an average lot. So what we did was we took the parcels, rather than calculating everybody down to the exact square foot and saying you owe this much for every square foot of your property, we say you're generally a small lot, if you're under 5,200 square feet. You're an average lot if you're between 5,250 and 8,750. You're a large lot if you're between 8,750 and 10,500. And if you're bigger than 10,500, so you've got more than 1.5 times the standard lot size, then you're extra large. So everybody that's a small lot gets treated the same. Everybody that's an average lot gets treated the same. Everyone that's a large lot gets treated the same. So, you don't have to worry about, well, his lot is 200 square feet bigger than mine, or mine's 200 feet bigger than his, now I'm paying a bigger bill. No, you've got a single family house on a small lot, you've got a single family house on a small lot, you both pay the same. So that's the approach we're taking. And you can see then, like I said, the average lots are assigned a unit of 1.0 for assessments. Small lots are 0.75, large lots are 1.25. And it's all based off the cost of that cost per square foot for a 7,000 square foot lot. So we kind of build the whole assessment calculations off of that. Does that make sense? Okay. So we're required by law in the feasibility report, Appendix C, like I said, Appendix A is all the maps, Appendix B is all the costs. Appendix C, as in CAT, that's where all the assessment information is. So first of all, we go through and we put together a list of every property that we think is eligible for inclusion in the assessment rolls. And that's Appendix C1. And then Appendix C2 lists out our current estimate of all the assessments, right down to the penny, for each type of improvements, for the street, for the sidewalk, for the sewer service going to your house, for the extra work that we had, we widened 6th Avenue out to 28 feet, we've got all that identified. So if any one of you wanted to come up to me after the assessment and say, well, this is my property, what's my estimated assessment, we can show you your property is listed on its own line in the appendix. And then, again, that information, I've got a copy here with me tonight. It'll be posted on the city's website probably within the next week. So, but I'm not gonna go through every property by property right now, I'm just gonna show an assessment, or a summary. You know, like we said, the residentials, we group them as small, average, large, extra large. So this gets into what the typical costs are for each one of those categories. So first of all, the sanitary sewer service, I mentioned that that line only serves an individual house. So they're the only one benefiting from that line, so they get charged the full cost of that line because it's a brand new pipe that they're getting as part of the project. So the cost depends on how much we have to do. Sometimes we do 30 feet, sometimes we have to do 40 feet. You know, depends on where the construction limit is relative to the sidewalks and other slopes and those types of things. So for most of the properties, the range that we're seeing in our estimated assessments is about $47.20 to $62.60. There are a couple of unique parcels that fall outside this range, but the vast majority of the parcels in the project would fall in this range of $47.20 to $62.60. So that's for the sewer service. As far as the street and the sidewalks, the amount per parcel that we're estimating, and I've done the calculations separately, so you don't see all that here, but this is just the bottom line totals. For a small lot, so those lots that are 5,250 square feet or smaller, the estimated assessment for streets and sidewalks combined is $8,528. For an average lot, the estimated assessment is $11,370. For a large lot, it's $14,213. And again, if you took that middle number, the average number, times 0.75, you'll get the small number. Take that middle number times 1.25, that gives you the large number. Anybody that's larger than, you know, that's got an extra large property, the cost would be $1.624 per square foot. So that's the basic number that is built for the street and sidewalk assessments. And again, these are just preliminary numbers because we don't have the actual cost yet, because we won't have that until we get bids from contractors. This is just our best estimate. And we try to be conservative, because I'd rather come back at the end of the project and tell you the number went down 20% than to stand here tonight, give you a number, and then come back 2 years from now and say, oh, the number went up 20%. I'd rather, you know, give you a higher number now and have it come in lower at the end of the project. So we are conservative with our numbers. But just for reference, that average number for the street and sidewalk, we're estimating 11,370. Actual projects down below 2018 was 11,393. 2019 was 11,390. 2021 was 11,410. So you can see we're real consistent with previous projects that have been done in the city. That shows us that this project is, you know, if those other projects were financially feasible, this one is going to be as well. Now, one thing to note is that number for 2021, 11,410, that was out of this report. Because we haven't done the final calculations yet, we're just getting the last pieces of information. I'm guessing, I don't want to say, but the final numbers are going to be lower than that. I would bet that I just know that they're going to be lower than that. I don't know exactly how much, but they're going to be lower than that. So our number now that we see at 11,370, I'm hoping that at the end of the project we can come back and give you good news that that number would come in lower. But even at the 11,370, you can see right now it's consistent with what we've had in 2018, 2019. So this project isn't, exorbitantly more expensive than the prior projects we've done in the city. So, example parcel. So if you had an average lot and the numbers came in exactly, the cost came in exactly the way we have in the report, this is what your assessment would be. So for street and sidewalk, you'd have $11,370. For a sewer service, you'd have $4,720. So a total assessment would be just over $16,000. The estimated amount for assessments in the 2021 project were $15,830. So you can see real close, again, about, within about 1.5%, which is, better than inflation. Inflation is going to about 9-10%, 8-9%. So we're beating inflation for sure. 2019, the number was $14,809. 2018, it was $13,882. So you can see we're still, the proposed project is right on par with previous projects that have been done in the city. We're getting close to the end, I guarantee. We're less than 10 slides to go. So now it's more additional information regarding assessments. Again, I just want to stress, these are just estimates at this point, and we do try to be a little conservative so that if anything, the numbers go down rather than go up when we get to the end of the project. So after tonight's public hearing, and we get all the information from you and input from the public, the council will take it under advisement. City will look at how it compares to previous assessments. They'll look at the assessment roll and see if it all makes sense to them. They can ask or direct us to make any modifications they want. I mean, they have a policy that we're supposed to follow, but they still have the ultimate authority to tell us to deviate from that policy if they feel there's justification to do so. So the city will take them under advisement. If they choose to go forward, and if we wind up applying special assessments, that would happen at the end of the project. So we'd be back here 2 years from now, roughly, telling you the numbers at the end of the project and what the actual assessment amounts are, rather than these estimates we got tonight. If they get assigned, if assessments got assigned, you would have a term of 15 years to pay them back. That's what the policy allows for a street reconstruction project, is 15 years. There would be interest charged. The interest is driven by the interest the city has to pay when it sells that bond to finance the project. So let's say the city sells a bond and they get 2.5% interest on the bond. When they assign the assessments at the end of the project, they would charge 3.5% interest. Because that 1%, they've got to track these payments over the next 15 years from 100 different properties. So there's cost, labor costs for the city to have to manage and track the cost for 15 years. So that's why they add that 1% to cover their administration. The city does allow for deferral of assessments. That's allowed under state statute if a city chooses to allow that. The city's policy does allow for deferral of assessments. There's certain criteria you'd have to meet. You have to be disabled, you have to be a veteran, I believe, or you have to be of a certain age and an income bracket. And you have to fill out a formal application, and then the city council will have to approve that application. It sounds good, right? I can get my assessment deferred, but you need to be aware that getting an assessment deferred does not mean it's forgiven. So if you have a $15,000 assessment on your property and you defer it, that $15,000 is still due, it's just due at a later date. And in the meantime, that 3% or 3.5% interest is going to continue to accrue each year. And it's probably going to hit, when you come to sell your property or you pass it on to the next generation. Somebody's going to have to, that bill will come due. So it's a tool to be used, and I want to make sure you're aware of it, but it's got to be considered carefully before you actually use it. Okay, so just a little summary of the total breakdown of cost again. As I mentioned, the overall project, $11.4 million. The estimated assessments, remember I said the eligible assessment amount was like $3.3 million. The actual calculations, when we go through them, the actual amount we would collect in assessments is about $1,845,000. So you can see that represents about 16% of the overall project cost. So about $1 of every assessment, other funding sources are putting in $5. So this assessment's only paying 1 out of every $6 on the project. The balance, the city would pay about 45% overall, and the county would pay about 39% overall. So that would give us our 100% of the $11.4 million project. A little bit of a brief outline of the 429 process that we have to follow. So the feasibility report, as I indicated, has to be ordered and has to be prepared by a certified engineer, which I am. It has to identify the estimated assessments, which it does in Appendix C. We have to hold a public hearing, which is tonight's meeting. After this, the council would have to officially order the project. So we don't go any farther than tonight until they tell us to go forward. And as the clerk indicated at the start of the meeting, the city's going to take the next 2 weeks to consider that, and then they'll be making that decision at their meeting 2 weeks from tonight. So if any of you go home and think about it and have more comments, or you talk to your neighbors or whatever, you'd have an opportunity to come in 2 weeks from tonight and make any comments to the city before they make that final decision in 2 weeks. Okay, let's say they choose to move forward, then we do the final design. They would approve the final plans. We put it out on the market and we get bids. We do the construction, and then once we have the actual dollars, when the construction's done, we calculate the final assessments based on the actual costs, and we'd have another hearing just like tonight's, except it would be primarily focused on the assessment dollars. And that we have to share with you, again, as part of the state statute. And you would have to get a mailer ahead of time to your individual property specifying exactly down to the penny what your proposed assessment is. We have a public hearing. After that public hearing, the city council could choose to make changes to the assessment roll, or they could adopt it as it's presented, but either way, they have to adopt it, and then it gets certified to the county, and then you have until the end of the year to pay it off in full if you like, to avoid the interest. Otherwise, if you don't, the county will roll it onto your property tax statement, and you'll see it show up as a line on your property tax statement. So you'll see a line for special assessments for the city of Two Harbors, and you would pay that each year for 15 years until it's paid off. Let's say you come into some money in the meantime, you can come in anytime you want and pay it off early. So you can get it paid off in 3 years or 5 years if you want and avoid the rest of that interest. But if you do nothing, it'll just be paid on your property tax statement every year. And then when it's finally satisfied, that line item on your property tax statement will go away. So it'll be very clear and state right there that this is a special assessment for the city of Two Harbors. And once it's gone, it will go off the statement. Now, you have rights under the state statute as well. So you have the right, first of all, to object to the assessment and say, I don't think I'm getting the value that you say we're getting. So you have the right to do that. But just standing up at a meeting and saying that isn't going to do much, right? The objection has to be put, for it to be valid, it has to be put in writing. And it has to be submitted to the city before they certify the assessment roll. So you don't have to do anything tonight. You've got 2 years to think about this. It's when we have that next meeting at the end of the project, that's when you would file a written objection if you object. That initiates, that puts the city on notice that you're objecting. But that in itself doesn't do anything either. The property owner then has to take the next step to file it at district court, and you have 30 days to do so. So if you stand up in a meeting and say, I object, and you sit back down, it'll be noted in the record, but nothing more. If you submit a written objection, that'll get noted in the record too and documented, but unless you take it farther, still nothing will happen. So to actually challenge an assessment, the burden's on the property owner to go to the court and say, I want to file a formal challenge to the assessment. And then, you'd have to, the city would present its case, you present your case, and we'd work out the resolution. Okay. And again, the key benefit for us is, or the key measure for us is we can't assess you more than your property benefits from the project. That's the legal definition. If you go read the state statute, it says the city can assess no more than the benefit received from the project. So, and we've done a lot of these projects, and we have a sense for how much value gets from having brand new streets and new utilities. So, that's why the policy's been crafted the way it is, and that's why the calculations are done the way they are. Because we're trying to, we don't want to assess you more than we have to. We don't want to go, it's not right for us to assess you more than you benefit. So we are consciously trying to make those calculations so that, they fit. Even if you came in and said, I challenge you, and we could go and say, oh yeah, we can calculate the value that, here's the value of the benefit you're getting, and here's what you're getting assessed, so yeah, we're within the legal, the law. So, the city's already thought through that when we put together a project like this, to try and make it as reasonable as possible. Because the city council, at some point, when we do their street, they're going to be, one of the parties being assessed, just like everyone else is. So they've got just as vested of an interest as all the property owners do. Okay, so we're wrapping it up here. Project schedule, just so you know where things go. Tonight is the public hearing. That's tonight's meeting. 2 weeks from tonight, that's when the city council will consider whether or not they want to order the project and officially move forward with a final design phase. Again, there'd be a checkpoint at the end of that to see if they still want to continue or if they want to pull the plug at that point. If they continue to move forward, we anticipate the final plans would be ready for council approval in February. We then would get bids from contractors on the open market in March. Assuming that we get a bid that is, that seems in order, we bring it back to the council in April to award a contract, get the contracts and things in place. Excuse me, have a neighborhood meeting with the neighborhood properties, usually early May, to start to talk about things like water service and access and mail and garbage and those types of things. And then once the frost is out of the ground, usually by Memorial Day, we're ready to break ground and start getting into the construction. And by that point, we would have an idea of what order they're going to be doing the blocks in. So we'd be able to share that with you at that meeting before construction starts. We'd have to stop construction at the end of the first construction season, usually around the end of November, or excuse me, the end of October, early November. Summer of '24, we'd pick it back up again, we'd finish off the rest of the construction, and then when it's all done, we would come back and have another assessment hearing, public hearing, just like we're having tonight, where we'd go through the final costs, the final dollar amounts, and that's when the city council would decide whether or not to actually certify the assessment roll and assign those assessments. So, the next steps, we've met the legal requirement of the state statute by holding tonight's meeting. Again, I'll open it up to the council for questions here in a minute. When they get done with their questions, we'll open it up to the public for your questions. The council then can take anywhere up to 6 months to decide if they want to move forward. This public hearing we're having tonight is valid for 6 months. If it gets beyond 6 months, they'd have to hold another one. But they expect to make their decision at their next meeting in 2 weeks from tonight. So if you're interested to come back for that meeting, that's when it'll be considered again. And again, we'd have a neighborhood meeting prior to the start of construction in spring of 2023 if the project moves forward. So with that, I'm finally done. And Mr. President, I will open up to you for questions.
Certainly. Do you have any questions from the council? Go ahead, Robin.
Joe, can you explain to us, as I was looking at the maps, the people that live on the corner properties won't be double assessed because they're getting fixed on 2 sides, correct?
Correct. Yep, it will just be based off the area of their parcel. And that's one of the benefits of doing a neighborhood project this rather than just doing one street.
Okay,
Because we're doing, both sides, it gets put into the overall, it'll be the overall costs
right.
divided by the overall area.
Okay, and then the other question that I had was, are any of the streets that we're looking at, have any of those alleys had improvements, and are people paying for those improvements at this time?
Yes, there are two of the blocks where the alleys behind the parcels, one was redone in 2018, one was redone in 2019.
Okay, how are we dealing with that?
We're still exploring the options for that. Or what our legal options are. Well, because, there's nothing that says you can't assess the
Front and back, right.
Right. The question is, what, can we defer the new assessments until the old ones are paid off? Can we combine them and just make it a single payment? How many of the actual alley assessments have already been satisfied and paid off? So that's still being reviewed.
And is that reviewed with the finance committee?
Yes.
Okay,
Will be.
and will be updated, I'm assuming?
Correct.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Councilor Erickson.
First, Joe, thanks for a very understandable presentation. I really appreciated the detail and the information. A couple questions that I have are, on the map that you're showing on 4th Avenue, did I hear you say that if the county board does not approve a certain section of that, would that then cause us not to do that share? Could you just clarify that one more time?
Correct. Right now, the county has authorized 4th Avenue between 6th Street and 5th Street. So you come down 5th Street and the left-hand side of that L at the bottom. That's already authorized by the council, excuse me, by the county. It's the 2 blocks east of 5th Street. So the blocks between 5th and 4th, and 4th and 3rd, those are on their county board agenda for tomorrow. Yeah. But, staff has reviewed it and, shared the numbers, and the preliminary indication they've gotten back is positive.
Okay.
So, but if the county board tomorrow said, no, we're not gonna do those 2 blocks, then they would be cut out of our project as well.
Okay. And then my follow-up question, and this may be a Miranda question too. Obviously, the 15 years is a long period of time to pay those off, which could potentially be yearly assessments. If a resident were to sell their parcel, does that go with the parcel, or do they have to defease that whole amount before they sell their property?
I think we've been asked this question before. I'll take a shot at it first, Miranda, if you want. The assessment goes with the property. So if the property were to change hands, the assessment would stay with the property. Typically, though, if you come in and you're a buyer looking to buy a property, you're gonna want that assessment resolved as part of your closing. It doesn't legally have to be. I mean, legally, both parties could agree that, oh yeah, we'll just let the assessment roll over and we'll just keep paying it. But usually it's like, no, let's clear that up as part of this transaction. And whether that's the buyer or the seller that pays it off, I mean, that's the individual negotiation of that transaction. But legally, my understanding is it could roll over with the property. It very rarely does. Usually it gets cleared up at the time of transfer.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Counselor Glauser.
Thank you. I guess just because I can't calculate it all in my brain, so is a 25-foot lot considered a small lot?
Yes.
Yes.
And so then an average, the regular 50-foot lot would be considered the average lot?
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to put it in perspective, because I'm like, okay, can't quite figure that one out. Sorry.
Any other questions from the council? If not, at this time, I'd open the floor up to the public for anything they'd want to say. I would just ask that we would have to have you write your name and address on a sheet of paper, because the clerk has something prepared for that.
I'm more than willing to share the podium. You can come up here and
Yes, and please stand at the podium.
Sure, why don't you come over and sit there?
If there is any property owners that would like to be heard.
Do you want me to step up there, or just?
Yep.
Yes, please.
Oh,
And if you
yes.
could put your name and address on that sheet of paper that
Okay.
we're just set.
I'll write it after.
Yep.
John Hanson, 1514 9th Avenue and 410 4th Avenue. Looking at number 43 slide here, and the street and sidewalk portion looks like it's been very consistent, and the estimate is actually a reduction. But the sanitary sewer service from 2018 to the new project nearly doubles. What I'm wondering is, you know, you've got a curb stop when you're hooking up water, which is pretty much the same for everybody. Sewers, I imagine you're looking at the condition of that sewer as you're not gonna tie into a junk sewer, so you have to go all the way to the footing of the house or something?
No, no, we typically, you're right in that, you know, if we go out, say 30 feet to the, roughly the right-of-way line, and we see that the pipe beyond that is crumbled or broken, yeah, we'll go a few more feet to chase that, but, first of all, we don't have easement to go onto the private properties, you know, more than what we just need to do to make the connection. And then secondly, if we get too close to the house, now it requires a plumber's license, whereas our contractors are considered more highway heavy, so they're authorized to do up to a certain point, but if we get within a certain point of the house, then we gotta bring in a plumber. So typically, no, we're not going much more than a few feet past the right-of-way line. And as far as the cost itself, yeah, somewhat of it is dictated by, you know, just the price of materials, because we bid, I mentioned it, we bid these projects on a line item basis. So we, you know, okay, what are you gonna, 8-inch diameter plastic sewer pipe, what are you gonna charge us per foot for that? You know, and a Y branch where the service comes off the main out towards the house, what are you gonna charge for that Y branch? And then the 6-inch line going to the house, what are you gonna charge for each foot of that? And then we literally, you know, measure, okay, one Y branch plus X feet of pipe at the price they give us, and that's how the assessment's calculated. So if that number has jumped up from 2018 to 2022 more, it's because those specific bid prices for those specific materials have gone up. So
The installation is probably more.
installation is some of it too, yeah, because the
What I'm
contractors are
wondering
large,
is,
like they
would it be a good investment for a homeowner to improve their sewer up to where the curb stop for the water is? So that when they do hook on, they don't go any further?
You could, I guess it depends on if you get a good deal from a plumber. You know, usually, we're getting, you know, the economy of scale, you know, when we put $11 million project on the market, we get good bids from contractors, because that's a solid chunk of work that they're able to, you know, get for their company. And, you know, they know they've got 2 years' worth of work built. In terms of, sure, in terms of if it's cost effective, I had an answer, but I lost my train of thought. I was gonna say that If someone has done their sewer service recently, and you've got, pipe that's only 5 or 10 years old, you can let us know that, and then, we may limit how much we put in, right? If you say, hey, I got new pipe all the way out to the street, so I don't want you chasing it back 30 feet.
So is one person living next to their neighbor, one makes the improvement, has a good sewer line running out, they're gonna get a lower assessment?
Probably, because we put the main line in, well, obviously we'll have to, probably disturb, maybe 5 or 10 feet of pipe, but we wouldn't necessarily have to chase it for 30 feet.
Okay.
So, but in the grand scheme of things, now they're gonna have paid a plumber up front, and then they're still gonna pay an assessment on the shorter service, so, the overall total may be a wash.
It might be a plumber.
Yeah. But if you've done it, if you've done it within, recent history, we can look at maybe giving a credit too. Like if you say, hey, I ran new pipe all the way out to the sewer main. Now you're ripping up that pipe I just put in 5 years ago or 3 years ago. Well, if you have documentation on that, we can look at that and say, okay, we can credit back a portion of the value of the pipe because, yours was relatively newer than everybody else's in the neighborhood. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Angela Schubert at 301 4th Avenue. So the assessment is due when you have the final assessment, so we would have some time to start preparing for that. You're not saying that when you approve or don't approve, we need to have it done. Okay, okay, that's good. And when can we find out about the trees and those type of things? I have a lot of landscaping right up to the curb, like all along. And if I'm gonna have to move all those plants,
See some time.
I need a lot of time. So, then I have one more.
Okay.
And did I understand that as a result of these improvements, we can expect our property taxes to also go up? Probably. Okay. Good.
So since I was off the mic, I'll just kind of restate the 3 answers. The first question was, when do the assessments get assigned? And yes, that's correct, they would get assigned at the end of construction. So they would be assigned in the fall of 2024, and so you could pay them, that's what, your first payment would be due if you let it roll over on your property taxes. The first payment would be due during calendar year 2025, is when the first assessment payment would be due. Second question is, what if you have landscaping and things like that up near the curbs? We'll cover that when we get to the neighborhood pre-construction meetings. If you've got a lot, we'll send someone out to work with you specifically on it and talk you through it. Because generally what we're gonna do when the contractor comes in and he's ripping that street out and ripping those sidewalks out, anything that's left there, he's assuming is supposed to get ripped out. So if there's things in advance, and we had some on last year's project, we had one that was very landscaped on 5th Avenue, birdhouses and all sorts. We work with them ahead of time, whatever you want to preserve, pull it out first and get it stored somewhere so that it's safe, and then when the project's done, we'll work with you to coordinate to get it put back in. So, we do have usually a handful of like that on every project, so. And we'll have what's designated a project representative that's going to be on site every day. So we'll make sure that you have their contact information and that they're out there meeting with you and getting all that coordinated ahead of time. And the third question was, will property taxes go up? So, I guess, the answer to that is probably. I said potentially, and it's probably is correct. Because by law, we're stating that there has been an increase in benefit, there's a monetary benefit to your property from the improvements we're making. That likely means when the assessor comes through and does the next assessment of your property, he's going to identify it as having a higher market value because we made this investment in the infrastructure. And that higher market value, it depends on the rate of the levies and things too, right? If your market value goes up and the levy rate goes down, it could be a wash, but usually things tend to trend in the upward. So, you'll probably have a higher market value after the project, and then that will probably translate into a higher property tax moving forward as well. Such is the price of progress.
Go ahead, Lance.
Hey, just to clear up, county doesn't assess for their projects, right?
Correct, the county does not assess.
So it's kind of just luck of the draw, right? If you live on Fourth Avenue, you're not
No.
gonna be assessed for streets and sidewalks by the county.
You will not be assessed by the county, but the city's intent is to divide the total project cost by the total project area.
So we are.
So,
okay.
yes.
So it is, it's not just certain people that will be assessed.
Every parcel.
And-
Right.
And that's,
I know that was the concern, I was just
Yeah.
kind of doing it for.
and that's the basic
I understand.
argument, if you live on, one of the county state aid highways where the county gets state money, and then right across the street from you is the local. And if you're that guy on the corner of the local street and it's like, oh, I got a $15,000 assessment, and right across the street, they paid zero because they're on, that to me is not fair. When you look at that property there, they're getting new sewer, new water, new street, new sidewalk. This block here is getting, you're getting the exact same benefit. It should be treated the same in terms of the assessments. And the city legally can assess, these are parcels within the city of Two Harbors. So it's eligible for assessment when there's an improvement project done. Now, the city does not assess for costs it doesn't incur. Like if the county has a standalone project, the city's not gonna come and say, well, we're gonna, use it as a money-making scheme and, assess people for costs that we didn't actually spend. That's why, all we'll assess for is the city's costs, but we'll assess over the whole area. So the larger this project is, geographically, the more those costs are able to be spread out and the more it makes those assessments more reasonably valued.
Go ahead, Counselor Erickson.
I just wanted to follow up on assessed value. I think many of us in our community have seen our property values increase without any improvements in the past few years. So I think there's a larger accessible process that happens at the county level that we just need to be thoughtful of. So yes, while over time there'll be an increase in your assessed value if you have these improvements, those things are happening throughout our taxable market area regardless of whether these improvements are happening. So I just want to not necessarily tie an increase in property taxes to just a project like this, because we are seeing overall assessments growing in our taxable market base, both in the city and throughout the county if people have multiple parcels. So as we see what assessors do, and they're not here today, and I don't want to speak for them, but generally speaking, their role and goal is to put a assessed market value on what you can sell your property for. So that's the goal of that, not necessarily just to say, these are those specific pieces. So they are also looking at the trends for sales and making sure that what the properties are selling for are what we're assessing at. So that's another component piece of that, why we're seeing, I think, in our community and other communities, some pretty significant changes in assessed values outside of a 429 plan that's happening all over the state of Minnesota. Thank you.
All right, are there any other questions or comments?
I got one more for Mike.
Sure.
You were saying that the county has access to funding sources that the city doesn't have. As I understand it, at a threshold of 5,000 population, the city would qualify. Have you got any kind of reference you can give us from working in other towns? How significant or the magnitude of that if we were to expand the population somewhat?
Yeah, you're exactly right. The state they have county state aid, CSAH, and they also have municipal state aid, MSAS, municipal state aid system. So if you're a city and you have a population of greater than 5,000, you're eligible for MSAS funding. Now, they make you measure all the roads in your city, what's your overall mileage, and then they allow you to designate a certain percentage of the mileage. It's usually not a large percentage, but it's usually, and you're designating those roads that have key, characteristics, like it's collecting all of this traffic from a neighborhood, right? Kind of those main arteries of your traffic system. So, in terms of assessments though, on projects that are done in state aid cities that get state aid money, it does not affect the way we approach assessments. Just like we do for county assessments, it's, like Councilor Woodrow said, luck of the draw if I live on the county street or if I live on a state aid street. Well, that's not fair though. I mean, it should, the assessment policy should be applied uniformly and equitably to all the properties in the area. So, because you think about it, the city, if I go back to that slide, of the overall financing. Right there. You know, the city is still paying over $5.1 million, 45% of this project is coming out of the city project. Now, some of that money is reserves, you know, that's generated from water and sewer bills. But a lot of that is generated, you know, from the general tax levy. So usually, when we approach projects in state aid communities, we say the state aid money the city's getting is going to help keep everybody's taxes lower, right? It's being applied towards that 45% portion of the city, not the 16% that's getting assessed. So generally, even if we do get assessments, or excuse me, state aid money, we use that to offset the general levy cost so that the entire city benefits from that state aid money. And we don't use it to specifically lower assessments for that particular project.
I guess the context I'm thinking in is, as we go into short-term rentals, which diminishes the population, or certainly isn't working to increase it, it's another cost that we all pay
For that infrastructure.
if we have the pressure of all these people, but they're not residents, they're coming and going, and will forever be below those thresholds. It's just I don't know how significant it is, but
Yeah, and unless MnDOT changes the policy for state aid system started back in, I think it was the 40s or the 50s. You know, they came up with the formula for who qualifies, who's eligible. So, you know, and they've made some tweaks to it, but unless they take a radical new approach to recognize something like a short-term rental, it's, you know, right now, it's, as far as I can see, it's gonna be that 5,000 limit. And there's always a couple of cities that are right hovering around, you know, they'll get over it for a couple of years and they drop back down. But for like some, like Two Harbors is roughly 4,000 population. I mean, to make that jump from 4,000 to 5,000, I mean, that's pretty rare to go from a 4,000. I mean, it takes, you know, decades to gain that. I mean, if you're looking at like a 3% population growth and you're trying to grow your population, you know, by 1,000 people, it's usually, you know, 10, 20-year process. But I mean, no, your example of the short-term rentals is, you're right. I mean, you still have to have the infrastructure there, you know, and that infrastructure still has to be borne by the community, so how big is the community that's bearing that burden? Sure. That's why we're here. Sure.
Okay, so for the properties, and that would be me and my daughter across the street that are at the corner of 4th Avenue and 3rd Street, 3rd Street isn't on this. So later on, if and when that gets done, do we have to pay this again?
But I would offer, so the question was, you know, if you live on the corner right now at the edge of the project, and then in the future, the next street gets done, which would be assessed again. And yeah, the assessments are done on a project-by-project basis. The city's policy, though, does take into account that north-south streets have less properties that abut them than east-west. I mean, the east-west avenue on a block, there's usually 16 properties, 8 on the side. Northwest block, there's only 4 properties, 2 on the side. So the city adjusts that 50% cost, that, if I can get back there, so my fingers there. That's in here somewhere, there it is, right there. So the street that says 50% of the cost, that's for east-west streets. If we come to a north-south street, that number drops to 15%, 1-5. So if your assessment was 15,000 for the east-west, it would be 5,000, you know, in relative terms. So, sure.
Will we get a letter telling us what you all have decided? Like we got the letter telling us about this meeting?
Usually you have to stay tuned into the next following council meeting to see what we would.
So the next council meeting is when you'll have decided?
Correct.
And that is?
2 weeks.
2 weeks, okay, thank you.
Just remember that just means that we're doing a preliminary project. It doesn't mean that we're gonna go and do it.
Correct.
It means we're gonna get all of the numbers together so we know exactly what it's gonna cost. And if it comes back and we look at it and it's like astronomically high, then we would probably not do the project. So there's a couple of steps here before we get actually to the part where we're going to like start construction. So if you have questions, be sure and, check out the website, talk to the folks at City Hall. Next week, if we order the preliminary study, is that what it's called, Joe?
What?
Not the preliminary, I'm sorry.
Final plans.
Yeah, the final plans.
Detailed plans.
But that doesn't mean we're gonna do it. There's no dirt being moved until we make that one last, and you would be notified before we do that.
And approximately how much time would we have between when you decide that and when you start?
Now and next
It's
June.
February
Feb-
2023, according to the schedule, is
Yeah.
when we approve the plans.
Yeah,
Yeah, but you still wouldn't award a construction contract until April. So we
Yeah.
basically have from now until.
until April.
Anyone else? If not, I will ask if there are any communications.
Mr. Chair, we have received no communications regarding the project.
All right, thank you.
Well, we did get one telephone call that I've got on my list to call tomorrow.
Okay.
Do you have a name and address for the telephone?
I have to look back at my emails. I got it from your clerk, I can get that for the record if you need it.
Thank you. All right, do I have to ask this 3 times, Patty, or
Yes.
2 more times? Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Is there anyone else that would like to speak? If not,
I'll make a motion to adjourn the
thank you, Councilor Woodruff.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries, and we adjourn, reconvening our regular city council meeting. All right, I see nothing under appearances. Administrative reports. Nothing? Brad, do you have anything? Committee reports, the Utilities Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had 2 appearances scheduled for our utility meeting last week. Neither one of those people showed up, but we did review some correspondence and just basically reviewed it. It's been sent on to the appropriate parties for further review, attorneys, whomever. And there was really no other business that was reviewed. There was a few questions asked and answered, and that's about it. So it was a brief meeting.
Thank you. Library Board.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't sure if the library director is on. I can't tell if she is, Jose. She was, no, okay. All right, then I will take this. She was offering to do a report. So we met on October 4th, and we did have the library technician go through the condition under when and how books are weeded, which was actually very interesting. To get things for the book sale, if they're the condition, if they're shelved wrong or not checked out within 36 months, that type of thing. Also, we talked about the improvement of the lawn in the basement that's been happening at the library. It's been really, really good. And discussed changing the board meeting to the second Tuesday of the month to give the director time to actually get the numbers together instead of scrambling at the beginning of the month. And also discussing the logo and branding of the library, which I think is exciting to kind of update the current logo that we do have. And she's also going to be looking towards getting a Bland and Luce grant and a programming policy and updating that. And our next meeting is Tuesday, November 1st. So that's our report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Reynolds. Did I miss any other committee reports? No? Okay. Next up, I have a resolution approving the consent agenda items.
So moved.
Second.
Patty, could you read those in, please?
And number 1, allowing claims against the city of Two Harbors to be paid on October 11, 2022. 2, approving payroll for the second half of September 2022. 3, authorizing payment to Lakehead Constructors in the amount of $1,672,071.82 for pay application number 11 for the wastewater treatment plant project. 4, authorizing payment to Bolden Mink in the amount of $17,012.50 for professional services for the preliminary design concepts for 2 tunnels. 5, authorizing payment to Bolton and Mink in the amount of $28,958 for professional services for the 21-22 street improvement project. 6, authorizing payment to Lake County Highway Department in the amount of $5,891.25 as reimbursement for payment to Braun Intertech for construction materials testing for the 21-22 street improvement project. 7, authorizing payment to Bolton and Mink in the amount of $29,972 for professional services for the 23-24 street and alley improvement project. 8, authorizing payment to Bolton and Mink in the amount of $1,572.50 for general engineering services. 9, authorizing payment to Basement Pros Incorporated in the amount of $4,116 for additional work for the project to repair the basement at the Chamber Office Building. 10, authorizing payment to Basement Pros Incorporated in the amount of $1,986.98 for additional work for the project to repair the foundation of the library. 11, accepting the proposal of MMUA to provide Tier 2 safety training program management services for an amount of $14,219. 12, approving the application of Two Harbors Curling Club for on-sale and Sunday on-sale liquor licenses beginning in October of 2022. 13, approving the application of Christina Schroeder to conduct massage therapy at 620 First Avenue. 14, authorizing the acting mayor and city clerk to execute and deliver a grant agreement with MnDOT for airport improvement excluding land acquisition for the AWAS relocation project.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on these items? Roll call, please.
Woodruff,
Yes.
Blosser,
Yes.
Grunwald,
Yes.
Passy,
Yes.
Erickson,
Yes.
Redden.
Yes. Patty, could I get you to also read the communications in, please?
Certainly. Number 1, a memorandum from Joe Rain and Brian Golden, Bolton and Mink, providing engineering project updates. Number 2, an email from Kitty Mayo, Lake County Press, advising of their candidate forum for city council seats on Tuesday, October 18th at 7 p.m. here in the council chambers. And that's all I have.
Perfect, thank you. After that, I see no unfinished business and no new business. So next, I will be looking for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Can I get a roll call, please?
Woodruff,
Yes.
Blosser,
Yes.
Grunwald,
Yes.
Passy,
Yes.
Erickson,
Yes.
Redden.
Yes, we are adjourned.